On Thursday, those troubling allegations emerged in the Washington Post against Alabama Republican Senate candidate Roy Moore, accused of sexual contact with a 14-year-old girl decades ago. The allegations graphic in their detail. Accuser Lee Korfman told the Post Moore took off her shirt and pants and removed his clothes. He touched her over her bra and underpants, she says, and guided her hand to touch him over his underwear. 3 other women also coming forward, saying that Moore pursued them when they were between 16 and 18 years old. Moore was in his 30s. But the candidate, also known to some as the 10 Commandments judge, has fired back with a strong denial, not only calling the accusations false, but painting this as a smear campaign, blaming the media, the Democrats, the Republican establishment, and the women who accused him.
Isn't it strange that after 40 years of constant investigation, people have waited to 4 weeks prior to the general election to bring their complaints? That's not a coincidence. It's an intentional act to stop a campaign.
These accusations coming at a watershed moment as more and more individuals come forward to share their stories of sexual harassment or abuse, implicating Harvey Weinstein, Louis C.K., and Kevin Spacey, among others. Now, the question for Republicans in Washington, Alabama, and all across America, how will they respond? Unless the election is delayed, Roy Moore will be on the ballot next month. Will Republicans choose to support a candidate accused of engaging in sexual misconduct with a minor? Will they denounce him and risk losing a key Senate seat? And if he wins, will they count him among their ranks? It's a defining choice. 42 Republican senators have responded to the allegations against Moore, most of them saying if the allegations are true, he should step aside. And the White House has echoed that same line as the president travels overseas this week. But Trump is promising further comments after he returns to the U.S. So will we see a more decisive response from the president? For more, let's bring in counselor to the president and one of his top advisors, Kellyanne Conway. Her voice among those advising Donald Trump as he decides whether to reject Roy Moore. And good morning, Kellyanne. The Washington Post story is now 3 days old. You've had time to digest it, time to look through it. Do you have any doubt about the veracity of those accusations?
I said very early in this process that the conduct as described should disqualify anyone from serving in public office, and I'll stand by that. The president and others in the Republican Party have made clear that if the allegations are true, this man should step aside. But I've gone farther than that, and I've reflected something the vice president said as well, which is everybody should know that conduct is disqualifying. And Mr. Moore has denied that conduct. I think you've got other people out there talking about what did or did not happen many years ago.
But that goes back to that if we prove this conduct, then he should leave. What is it that has to happen now for you to go into he should step aside?
Well, the one thing I will say is that the president also is not as focused on this as he is his major 13-day trip abroad. And so he made a statement, he's sticking by that statement, but he's not being briefed on this bit by bit because he is very focused on new trade agreements. He's very focused on global cooperation against a nuclearized North Korea. He's very focused on combating terrorism.
And we'll get to that. And we'll get back to that. But let me ask you again, do you have any doubt about the veracity of the accusation?
Martha, I only know what I read, and I take very seriously allegations like this, particularly when they involve somebody who happens to be one of my daughter's ages. I take this seriously. I've tried to be a very loud voice for a very long time.
So you believe the accusers?
Sexual impropriety. I know what I read. I don't know the accusers, and I don't know Judge Moore. But I also want to make sure that we as a nation are not always prosecuting people through the press. He has denied the allegations. I've read the stories. I've heard not the testimony and the evidence, but what people are saying publicly. And I think that what we've all said stands. I came out I was probably the first person in the administration to come out because I happened to be interviewed on a different network about a different topic, tax cuts. And I said, this conduct should be disqualifying. I mean, I look around and I say, is this the best we can do?
But we're still, I mean, Roy Moore says that, too, that conduct like that should be disqualifying. He's just saying he didn't do it. So what's the standard of proof here? It's one thing to say this is terrible conduct. It is terrible conduct. I'm not sure anyone would disagree with you. But the question is, and you are an advisor to the president, you have been following this. What is your standard of proof here? I mean, you either believe the women or you don't. And this isn't a trial.
Well, you said it best. It's not a trial. What do you mean the standard of proof and the evidence?
What does it take for you to say he should resign? What has to happen before you would advise the president to say Roy Moore should step aside?
The president said he should step aside if the allegations are true.
So where does the if lie?
But Martha, hold on. I want to broaden this conversation. It would be a very dangerous precedent for any of us, for any person in this country, to just be cast aside as guilty because of press reports. This is a democracy with a constitutional system that allows us to have a process. So if we're not in trial here, I only know what I read, and what I read is very disturbing, and what I read offends me greatly as a woman, as a mother of 3 young girls.
Understood, but what you're saying essentially is maybe those 4 women are lying.
No, I didn't say that.
We had 4 women who the Post
Martha,
came to.
I didn't say that. Okay, I didn't say that. But I also know that credibility has not been imbued on other people when they've tried to raise issues like this based on their political affiliations and based on who they work for. And we know that. There were many accusers over the years. There was much evidence against a former president and very little coverage of that, respectfully. The fact is that on this particular issue, we need to have a serious conversation. But on this one, you're talking about decades-long conduct, allegations in the press. And we already in this conversation have probably spent more time talking about Roy Moore and this than we've talked about a Democratic United States senator who's sitting in a federal courthouse as a criminal defendant in a trial, has been indicted on some serious criminal counts, and we can't get any coverage on it.
And we will be talking about that. We will be talking about that.
I want to be very explicit here. I denounce that conduct. And if the allegations are true, he should step aside. And if the allegations are true about a lot of people, they ought to step aside. And some of them are probably holding office right now.
Let me tell you what Mitt Romney tweeted this Friday. He said, "Innocent until proven guilty is for criminal convictions, not elections. I believe Lee Korfman. Her account is too serious to ignore. Moore is unfit for office and should step aside." So let me ask you one more question on this. Do you believe Lee Korfman?
I don't know Lee Korfman. I believe that both sides are alleging different things. You're asking me.
So that means it goes nowhere.
No, that's not true. That is not true.
How does it go somewhere? But you're also
asking me on behalf of the White House and the president to make a judgment about something when he's on a 13-day trip and spoke very explicitly, as has the vice president, as have I, and as have other top advisors. Let me say it one last time. The conduct as described is not just offensive and disgusting. It disqualifies anyone who's done it from holding public office. So let me go a little step farther. If there's anyone currently in public office who's behaved that way to any girl or any woman, maybe they should step aside, because in a country of 330 million people, we ought to be able to do better than this. I tried to raise this issue a year ago on October 9th. I said explicitly that I had been a victim of people in power, and nobody took me seriously. And you know why? Because of who I worked for, of whose campaign I was managing. I tried to have this conversation a year before everybody else. You want to have this conversation, everybody? Let's have it, but let's be honest about it. It goes far beyond one article in a newspaper. It's in most workplaces.
Let me just, I want to move on to Russia, Kellyanne, but let me say again, there are 4 women who were named and 30 witnesses corroborating it. And
they should have their day. They should speak up.
I think they did speak up.
Right. They should speak up, and they should have their day. The rest of it, you're asking me about political strategy and ballot access in the state of Alabama. That's up to Alabama. I cannot emphatically say enough what I think of the conduct. It's hard to even read these articles.
I know, but you also can't say whether you believe the accusers or not. You just can't. You're not going to go that far. So let's move on to Russia. I want to get some clarity on President Trump's position on Russia and election interference. He said Saturday on Air Force One that every time he sees Vladimir Putin, Putin says, "I didn't do that." And I really believe that when he tells me that, he means it. He tried to clarify that in a press conference overnight. Let's listen.
I believe that he feels that he and Russia did not meddle in the election. As to whether I believe it or not, I'm with our agencies, especially as currently constituted with their leadership. I believe in our intel agencies, our intelligence agencies.
Those two statements seem to contradict each other. Which is it?
No, it's what I can't imagine the president could be more explicit. He said yesterday, as he said today, that when President Putin says it, President Putin means it. He means that they didn't interfere in the election. What the president said
so
is that
he thinks he's just delusional, President Putin?
No, he didn't use that word. He said that President Putin believes it. What the president believes is what's most important here. He believes the assessment of the intelligence communities, and he stands by that. He's very respectful of that. Director Pompeo of the CIA said the same thing. And so this president has formed his judgment about that issue based on the intelligence communities in this country. And he also, the president is not the chairman of the Board of Elections in this country. He's the president of the United States. He wants to deal with President Putin and other world leaders, as he is for 2 weeks right now, Martha, on major issues like global security, on trade, perhaps, in other countries, on combating ISIS, on a nuclearized North Korea. Most Americans watching this show and everywhere in this country right now appreciate having a strong leader who's willing to take his counsel from the along with the international community and put the case right to North Korea and say to Putin and say to Xi and say to Abiy and say to others, and Moon, join with us in making sure the nuclearized North Korea.
Let's talk about what else he said about North Korea. President Trump tweeted this yesterday from Vietnam. Why would Kim Jong-un insult me by calling me old when I would never call him short and fat, which is apparently trending on Twitter right now? Oh, well, I tried so hard to be his friend. And maybe someday that will happen. How is that helpful?
I think the whole trip is very helpful. I believe that you have to ask the leader of North Korea.
How is that helpful?
Martha, what's helpful in full context is a 13-day trip where the president is very focused on global security and combating terrorism, and most importantly, containing a nuclearized North Korea. North Korea is everyone's business. This man's been on the job for 9 or 10 months. We inherited a mess, including a nuclearized North Korea, including the Iran deal, including many hotspots around the globe that he is trying, when he's here at his desk and when he's abroad on these trips, he's trying to make better on behalf of everyone.
And you think name calling is helpful? Calling somebody short and fat?
I think that was the president just responding the way he does to somebody who insulted him first. But I look at the full context of his entire trip and everything that he's trying to do. I think it's been an incredibly successful and inspiring trip for those who care about North Korea not being nuclearized, for those who care about free trade in this country, for those who care about trade agreements that don't keep screwing Americans and American workers, for those who care about Syria and what happens with China. I mean, what this president's been able to do with leaders around the world, the cooperation is up. They've announced big new deals here, which affect American workers and American interests. And that, plus the tax cut that we're going to get very soon, I think it's why you see the stock market and consumer confidence at all-time highs. People like what they see.
Okay, thanks very much,
Thank you
for joining us.